Hey everybody, we're going to get started. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar entitled Free Tips and Tools for Keeping Your Email List Clean and Problem-Free. Really appreciate you guys joining us today. I know that the past few months haven't really been easy for anybody, so we're really excited to come together and talk about something that's a little more positive. I'm Keith Reinhardt. I'm the marketing manager here at FreshAddress, and I'm joined by Chuck Carletta, our product manager. Just a quick reminder. Thanks, Chuck. Quick reminder that today's session is live. It's not a recording. So I always say this, but expect a couple mess ups, expect a couple laughs. Hopefully not all at my expense. Usually all at my expense, but that's okay. And now the customary housekeeping slide. I'm sure most of you guys know how to use GoToWebinar. Couple very important things. You want to make sure that your visual is correct. You should see our presentation and the little control panel. There's a little orange widget with a white arrow. You can use that to minimize the control panel so you can see the whole presentation. We definitely encourage participation. There's a little question tab in your control panel. Feel free to type in questions whenever you like. We'll take some time at the end of the presentation for those questions. If we can't answer them now, we'll get back to you right after the presentation with some follow-up. One last housekeeping thing. We'll send you a copy of the presentation within the next few days. This is also being recorded, so we'll send you a link to the presentation too. Just a little bit about us, FreshAddress. So we were founded back in 1999. We're an email database services company, and we help companies clean, protect, and grow their email lists. We offer a variety of services. They're all tied to email. They include email appending, postal appending, email change of address, and also our industry-leading safe to send email validation solution. And here's just a sampling of some of the companies we work with. Now on to the agenda. So today we're going to talk about the major threats to your email list, how they get onto your list and cost you money, and how to protect yourself against them. We're also going to demo a free tool that we've created that helps you gauge the health of an email list. And I think this is just a great time to talk about email hygiene, to talk about this enhanced tool. As I alluded to before, things have really changed drastically over the past few months, everywhere, especially in the email and digital marketing space. But I guess kind of with regard to email, many companies have lost touch, physical touch with their customers, and they've turned to email to kind of keep that bond, keep that line of communication open. As a result of that, we've seen a lot of companies start to send more email than they typically do. And we've seen them going deeper and deeper into their databases to maximize the reach of their campaigns. Another thing that we're feeling the pain of, and I know a lot of other marketers are, is that conferences have been canceled for the time being. Hopefully they're back up and running soon, and we can get those educational sessions in, and we can meet with each other and have some drinks and meals, and from a marketing standpoint, we can drive that activity that we're missing. As a result of that dynamic, I know myself and many other marketers are looking elsewhere to make up for that loss of awareness and lead generation and overall activity. And we're testing out and trying new data sources, new lead gen partners, new advertising partners. And, I think these things are great because it shows how versatile the industry is and how versatile we are as marketers, but it also presents a real level of risk that needs to be managed. And, that being said, I think on the brighter side of things, it's also important to remember that as a marketer, our customers, they want to hear from us. And email is often the best way to connect with them. So why not do everything in our power to make that happen? And I think we'll touch on a lot of ways to do that in this presentation. And before we start to really go down the road of talking about bad email addresses, the risks they present and all that stuff, I think it makes sense to define a quality email address, so we know, what a good one looks like before we talk about what a bad one looks like. So first on the list, it needs to be deliverable. That means it doesn't bounce. Your ESP will show you that it connected to an inbox. Also needs to be accurate. So the next level is it needs to reach your intended target. It's not a typo address. Someone could email KeithR@gmail instead of KeithR393@gmail. They're going to connect to a Keith somewhere, but it's not their intended target. Unless you've got a really amazing value proposition or offer, they're probably going to report you as spam or just not interact with your messaging. And then third, it needs to be the recipient's primary address. So I don't know about you guys, but I think over the past couple of years, I've got my count up to 20-something different email addresses. You want your customers and your subscribers and people that you're meeting out there to feel comfortable giving you their real, quote unquote, real email address, not their friends or their enemies or their personal assistant. You want their primary address. So now that we've looked at what a quality email address is, let's turn it over to Chuck to look at the bad email addresses that can create problems for you.
Perfect. Thanks, Keith. All right, so Keith was talking about what quality email addresses look like, and obviously it's important to understand what threats look like, what the bad email addresses look like. And so we want to give a high-level overview of kind of different things that we've seen with our experience here at FreshAddress before we go into solutions and kind of the product that we've been looking at to help people with their list hygiene. So let's start with the first threat that we have here, and that's going to be undeliverable or invalid email address. So there's many causes for something like this. It could be misspelled, it could be missing an @ sign, a .com, anything with data handling. So if you're ingesting a large email list, part of it could have been cut off in the process. And then my favorite category is nonsense typing. If you have a point of sale system that is not quite up to date, if someone is, say, like at Macy's signing up for a sale or signing up for some email list, they might just put garbage in when they're typing it, and it's going to be most likely an invalid or undeliverable email address that bounces. Now, fortunately for these kind of email addresses, these are pretty easy to ID and scrub out. So we rely on our 20 years of experience working with our ESP reporting network, doing real-time SMTP checks to address the validation of these emails, and then eventually deploying email potentially if it can be, if we had to make those corrections. Now, I think what is really more kind of the scarier side of email lists and something that we keep track of in email hygiene are the deliverable ones. So I'm going to go through a couple of different categories for deliverable that we have to keep an eye on. So the first one is deliverable but typo. So this one happens usually by accident. So in this example, you see acbliss@htmail.com instead of hotmail.com. So common error to either mistype, forget a letter, the domain name. So something like this, there are an alarming number of typo domains that actually pass email validation, and those need to be weeded out. I think kind of the scarier aspect of this particular example, at least for Hotmail or other popular domains, is that there are certain spam traps that specifically target popular domains, and they try to register something that's like htmail.com with a certain handle and pass that off as a spam trap. And those are things that, if you're looking at that, you may not necessarily know, or it might fly through. And so we'll talk a little bit more about spam traps in a second, but those typos can be very costly if you don't catch them. So let's go to the next category. So we have deliverable but bogus. So most of these email addresses, they're going to be worthless to you, but they may pass simple validation. So something like AAA@email.com or bill@microsoft.com. You've probably seen many of these. I myself, I think within the past month, I've received one from Amazon, or at least it looks like it was from Amazon. It has the logo, it had your credit card information changed, or your email address is updated. Click here to address it or to do whatever you need to do, a call to action. But if you actually look at the email address, it has Amazon in it, but it also has a bunch of letters and numbers. So these bogus email addresses, yes, they can be deliverable, but they're worthless to you and they need to be identified so you don't send it out to them. All right. So that's bogus. And the next category is also, I think, a quick one, and a lot of us are familiar with this, is deliverable but disposable. So users, if they're signing up for a website, they're trying to get a free trial, you'll see this used quite a bit. There are many websites where you can sign up and get a disposable email address that you use to sign up for these one-time services. Fortunately, FreshAddress, we track thousands of these domains. We put this in our catalog. We catch these and we notify you for part of our services if they're there. That way you can not send to them. But this is pretty common and something that we always keep a constant eye out for, and something that you should as well, because it is pretty common depending on the industry, if these are going to be used or not. All right, next one, I think everyone is also very familiar with these. They've seen these, get these emails a lot within their company, potentially. So there's no doubt that the role accounts, they can create problems if they're managed improperly, but that doesn't mean you necessarily want to block them. It really kind of just depends on two key factors. What's the goal of your messaging and what's your relationship with the subscriber? It's unlikely you want to market to this role account, but you may actually want to have a transaction with them. So that's why for part of our services for FreshAddress, we allow clients to allow specific role accounts. So if you happen to know a billing at email address that is valid and you want that particular role account to get it, you can mark that exception with us and we'll make sure that we allow it. Otherwise, the role accounts will be marked and you'll be aware of that so you're not sending it out to them when you really don't need to. All right, I would say the heavy hitter of the deliverable list is spam traps. So these are deliverable email addresses used to ID spammers. So a lot of these can look innocent. This list makes me laugh because I would say if I'm doing a manual review of an email list and I'm looking at bullets 1 and 3, at least to my eyes, those would be questionable. At least the third one I would remove entirely. But if I was looking at the second one, that's something that I probably wouldn't necessarily catch, nor would I remove it if I was manually looking at it myself. So spam traps can be dangerous. If you send one spam trap to an influential provider or sent to, it could reduce your inbox placement rates by 40% or more. So just one getting through can be detrimental to your campaign. So for spam traps, there's a variety of ways they could be introduced into your lists and just come into creation themselves. So for starters, some spam traps are just new email addresses that are created solely for the purpose of being a spam trap. And you'll see some of these spam traps, or I don't know if you would see them, but they are commonly hidden in websites, basically waiting to be harvested or scraped using different software. So some people, if they're using methods they really shouldn't to acquire email addresses, will scrape different websites to gather as much data, as much email addresses as they can. Most likely, they're going to be getting a decent amount of spam traps, which could tank your campaign. And I think the other one I always have to remind myself and keep in mind is that there are recycled email addresses that become spam traps. So I think a lot of people forget about this. You know, formal email addresses of a real person that became abandoned. Now, if someone had an email account a long time ago, say 10 years, it could have been valid. Maybe it was then quarantined for a year and it bounced, so it was undeliverable. That ISP could have turned around and flipped that email address back on and changed it into a spam trap. So that's why constant email hygiene is very important, because you truly don't know how your list is aged, and it's certainly not going to be perfect month over month. So constant vigilance and monitoring your list hygiene is very important. So bottom line, I think it's pretty clear, but it's not just undeliverable email addresses that pose a threat to your list. It's the deliverable but problematic, the deliverable but toxic. That's what FreshAddress is exceptionally good at. It's identifying these different categories and letting you know, what is a type of, what is a bogus email, disposable, what are role accounts, and also, what are the spam traps you have in your list. But, it's not just about identification of these problems. It's, identifying the next step. So that's really comes down to, how did these bad addresses get on your list? It was either through maybe acquisitions, good addresses going bad, or poor list management. So let's look at the first category, acquisition. So there's point of sale systems, there's websites, there's call centers. I think everyone has heard of these. And these are just very popular methods for email addresses to get into your campaign, to get into your email list. But depending on what they're using, if they're out of date, the design itself, you could be getting bad email addresses. So, for an example, some website forms don't accept the enough amount of characters for an email address. So if you have a longer name and you have a longer email address, the website might be cutting that off in its collection, and therefore it's giving you a bad, invalid, or potentially a deliverable but bad email address. And that's something that you need to catch. Same thing with a point of sale system. If someone is, either the cashier or the customer themselves, they're typing in their email very quickly. And if there's no validation built into that, there could be misspellings. There could be, people aren't quick enough to put that in. They may not care. Or, if you're the cashier, you have to deal with plenty of other customers. So that's something that could slip right on by, and you have a bad email in your list. Now, another one we've talked about, and I think we've gone over this quite a bit, is good addresses go bad. So I won't spend too much time on this, but in the summer, you could have a good email address, but by the time December rolls around, you've been blacklisted because that email was actually, it changed to a spam trap, and now your inbox placement took a hit and you're down by 40%. So just one spam trap can cripple your campaign. So this is something you've got to constantly be vigilant about and be aware of. Otherwise, it's going to happen. And that really kind of dives into the final category here, is poor list management. So really, I would say the common mistakes that are going to occur, if you have old acquisition practices, previous marketers, if you just did something differently, you got lists maybe a way that you shouldn't, or someone did something, you have these old emails and you need to clean them. Otherwise, you have no idea where they came from or how good they are. And then I think really what it comes down to is a long period of time without emailing, no routine list hygiene. I think I hammered this enough, but at the same time, it's so important that these email addresses can go bad. You have no idea. You have to make sure that you have a routine list hygiene running at all times to make sure you have the cleanest list, the cleanest campaign possible. Otherwise, it could cost you your inbox placement. And I think with that, I'll turn it back over to Keith to cover costs.
Thanks, Chuck. All right, so just to recap real quick, bad email addresses definitely go way beyond bounces. So it can really be the deliverable variety that we need to be concerned with. So deliverable, typo, bogus, disposable, roll account, and obviously spam trap addresses can cause some real big problems for us. So now let's take a look at how not protecting your list against these threats can cost you money. We say it all the time, but I think it bears repeating. We're firm believers that there's a price tag attached to every single email address in your database, and it extends way beyond just the cost per acquisition. And how well you manage the quality of these addresses can really make or break your business. And I think it's especially apparent in the current environment. So here's the bottom line. I think this part is pretty obvious. Undeliverable email addresses are worthless. They provide no value. And additionally, some of the deliverable email addresses in your file can be much worse than worthless. Chuck pointed out a couple minutes ago about the dangers of sending the spam traps and some other dead and dangerous addresses. It can cost you money, and it can also really derail your whole email program. I think everybody's got enough problems right now. Nobody wants another one, especially this. So here's how bad addresses cost you money. First, they screw up your campaign metrics, and they make it really hard to get a good idea of what's really going on with your campaigns. They also make it harder for you to reach the inbox. They force you to waste money, again, acquiring and deploying to useless or dangerous addresses. They can get you in trouble with customers and have a negative impact on customer satisfaction And again, as Chuck mentioned, worst case scenario, blocking and blacklisting if you send to the wrong address. So let's look for a minute about how bad addresses mess up your campaign metrics. I've seen it estimated. I see numbers all over the place, but I think I saw one recently that the typical database has a third or more addresses that are inactive. So when you're sending to too many of these bouncing and inactive addresses, it's again going to drag down your metrics, going to make it really pretty much impossible to accurately report on your campaigns. And I think this is really timely right now, especially if you're marketing to businesses. We've seen that many people have lost their jobs recently, or they're at least temporarily away from their jobs. Some of our recent campaigns over the past month or so have seen way more autoresponders that are telling us that either the person that we're trying to reach no longer works at the company, or they're out of office for quite some time. So lower engagement, absolutely. If not managed properly, these, at least some good portion of these will turn into bouncing email addresses. So this is something it's really important to keep an eye on now, and potentially a big problem if you don't manage it down the road. And all of this poor engagement has a negative impact on your ability to reach the inbox and get your emails delivered. Again, in the current environment where email is typically the best channel to reach your subscribers, that's not good. Chuck had mentioned again, just because an email address is deliverable doesn't mean that you should send to it. We all know that ISPs use negative and positive metrics to evaluate inbox placement. So deliverable but unengaged email addresses are going to hinder your access to the inbox, and as your engagement drops, so does your ability to avoid the junk folder. In terms of unnecessary spending, your ESP probably bills you on the size of your list or the number of emails you send, and your acquisition sources, I imagine, charge you on a pure email basis. So basically, you're burning money acquiring and sending to either dormant contacts or bad email addresses that will never engage with your company. It really just doesn't make any fiscal sense. And without the proper hygiene protocols in place, this is exactly what we'll be doing here. And bad email addresses also can really lead to lower customer satisfaction. And I think this is really a big one. If you can't hit the inbox, you can't reach your customers with the information that they need and want. I feel like we all have kind of a bond and an agreement with customers. There are certain pieces of information that your customers really, really want. Things like rewards, dollars, receipts, information on promotions, order confirmations, billing statements. When customers don't get these, especially a couple times, they're usually not happy, and what results from there is not really good. They can get annoyed, complain via social media, nobody wants that. If you have a call center, they can potentially flood that. That's going to cost you money. Worst case scenario, they leave you for a competitor. So none of the options or outcomes are good here. And like I said, you really want to deliver on that promise to customers, and having a clean deliverable email address for every one of your customers helps you deliver on your promises. And when you focus on quality up front and then maintain that quality over time, you really put yourself in the best position possible to deliver optimal value to your customers. Again, worst case scenario, blocking and blacklisting. You get kicked off your ESP, you lose your ability to send any email. It's never good, never a good situation. And we get asked all the time about the cost of hitting a spam trap. We've tried to wrap a number around that. I think it really varies by company and the situation. But I think a really good starting point when you start to wrap your mind around the cost here is thinking about what your company would lose if you couldn't send any emails for a few days, a few weeks, or a few months. The prospects there are pretty grim. All right. So now that we've thoroughly scared you, let's look at some solutions to kind of alleviate or eliminate these problems. So now we're going to look at 4 steps that you can take to protect yourself and your company against the threat of bad email addresses. So the first one is screen everything. Whether you're collecting email addresses via telephone, at point of sale, online, as Chuck mentioned again, there's quite a bit of room for error, quite a bit of room for human error here. And as one of his slides indicated and showed you, the error rates can vary widely, both with regard to where you're collecting an email address and, in your company and given situation. We did a case study a while back with a large retail client of ours, and they had an error rate of somewhere around 50% for what they captured in store. So they wanted to add all these folks to a loyalty program. They wanted to send them a welcome email, and 1 out of 2 people that came through the door, they weren't able to do that for. They valued a clean deliverable email address at around $15. They collect thousands, I would imagine, on a monthly basis. So there's an opportunity to lose some serious money here. And I think the bright side here is that it's a very fixable problem. And it just starts with making sure that every email address that you collect is clean and deliverable before it makes its way into your database. Another solution, it goes hand in hand with my last slide, is just to improve your acquisition practices. So there's a number of ways that you can do this. We think it's a great idea to validate at every entry point. It's a really good idea to have a system in place to detect bad email addresses in real time. This is an example of Hyundai that does this with our real-time email hygiene solution. So they're able to tell right away upon keystroke whether it's good or not. They're able to prompt either the customer or the worker at your company that something looks wrong here and to correct it. So it's a great option. Another way to reduce typos and issues is by optimizing your keystroking process. So there's a number of steps you can take, and Chuck alluded to some of them based on how and where you're collecting email addresses. Again, I think the big takeaway here is just do whatever you can to eliminate or reduce human keystroking error at every point of entry. You want to make it easy for your employees to see what they're typing. You want to make sure there's plenty of room for long email addresses. I know we did some research a couple of years ago that the average email form should be about 31 characters long. I guess that if we updated that soon, that number is probably bigger, not smaller. If you're writing down, if you're still using paper forms and you're having customers write down their information, you want to do similar to what Uno's does on the left and not the sign-up sheet on the right here. People think it's laughable, but I still see these lists out in the public. Not right now, but I've seen them over the past couple of years. So it's just anything you can do to eliminate that human keystroking error and I guess what you would call fat finger syndrome, if you will. Another really important step here is to develop an internal standard and stick to it. Because again, as Chuck mentioned, good email addresses degrade over time. They turn bad. So all lists are at risk, really. Even the folks that have quote unquote perfect double opt-in practices, they can have problems over time too. We believe that you as a marketer have an obligation to protect your customers and your company from unnecessary risk. And the only way to really do this is having a real neatly defined strategy in place. And we've also got some solutions and suggestions for how to make this happen. So it really boils down to formulating your own internal definition of what a quality email address looks like. Obviously, you want it to be deliverable. You don't want it to be problematic, a spam trap, honeypot, etc. And then you want to consider any exceptions. So again, if you're an accounting software company, Maybe a role-based account at email address is great. That's a perfect person for you to send it to, even if it's a few people in accounting at a given company. Other B2C brands and other companies wouldn't want to do that. So I think it really makes sense to look at your current situation, talk with stakeholders internally, and develop a standard. And then you want to hold every address you collect to that standard, everything. So anything that comes in from every department, every data source, every person, everywhere. Another thing that I think makes sense to bring up is just to think about quality over quantity. I know we can get bogged down with the idea of growing our email list over time, but you really want to focus on the clean, deliverable, quality email addresses that can drive more opens, clicks, and ROI for your company. And finally, I just got into it on the past slide, but trust no one, right? You really want to apply this quality standard everywhere, even third-party data resources, any vendors that you're working with, any partners. You want to validate these input files before they get into your database. We know that you don't scrape or harvest email addresses, so you also want to take steps to protect your organization against the possibility that an outside vendor or partner might. Another thing to keep in mind, if you're running contests with your stores or dealerships, you want to keep an honest person honest and keep a close eye on that data too. So everything should be encompassed in that strategy. And our last and probably most important recommendation is to ask for help when you need it. Most high volume senders need the support of a trusted partner to help clean their email lists. I think that's a great idea. Just because it's structurally valid and deliverable doesn't mean it's clean. Your ESP, I'm sure, removes hard bouncing email addresses, and that's wonderful, but it's not enough. They're not tackling the bigger problem of the deliverable but problematic stuff. And one thing I've heard the kind of the DIY, we're going to clean it ourselves, we're going to get help from our ESP approach, be likened to vacuuming a rug and calling it clean. There's still some, you've cleaned off the surface, but underneath there's still, a lot of grimy, nasty stuff that can cause problems if you don't address it. So now I'm going to pass it back to Chuck, and we're going to take a look at a free tool that we've recently enhanced that will help you check the health of your lists and then decide again whether you need the help of an outside partner to clean them. So let me see if I can pass it to Chuck.
All right. Keith, can you see my screen?
I can.
Perfect. All right, everyone. This is my favorite part of the webinar, and it's to really kind of show off the work we've put in over the past couple of months with our tool called Free List Check. I think this tool is important now more than ever because of what's going on with COVID. This tool is our free solution that helps you identify the count of good and bad email addresses that occur in your list. So I'd rather just walk you through how this works and then show you some sample reports for the results. So let's just do that quickly. So right now I'm on the website itself. We recently updated this. You can show some of our leading brands that we work with FreshAddress, give you a brief overview of what we scan for. And if you want to read into it more, we have some white papers below to show off the marketing guide to email validation and then understanding spam traps a little bit more in depth. But if you're here and you want to run a list and that's your main goal, it's very simple. So I'm going to scan my list. I'm going to select a file that only has email addresses in it, and it's a text file, and just upload it. Perfect. So for the purpose of just showing you how this works, I intentionally picked a small file. For this particular product, you can upload 5 million records in one go. That might take about 3 or 4 minutes, but it will work. But for, I guess, the purposes of just showing you this, it works relatively quickly and easily. and proceed. Now, you have the option here when you're running a list with us, if you want to do a white label scan or if you just want to do a normal report. So all that means is if you're a reseller, you have your own clients and you want to potentially just see how their list is doing, you could do a white label report. And that removes any references to us, to any of our products, and it's just the simple report itself. But after this, I'll actually show you the reports and the differences, and we can look at that. So yes. All right, your list is processing, and it will probably take about, it says an hour, it'll probably take about 30 to 40 minutes for something this low. We're obviously not going to wait that time. I have something prepared for you already. So let's take a peek at that. All right, so this is what the report looks like. And as you can see, this is a very large file. I put 4 million in this. And so what this does, this is a very simplified version and overview of what your file looks like. So I think kind of the main thing I want to draw your attention to right now, if you want to know at a glance how you're doing, you can see the file highlight and then you can see the overview chart. So in this particular one, 92% of the file is valid. And then we have 7.2, it has a warning. And then it seems like we have some duplicates here as well. And so if I wanted to look at it quickly, also the file highlight, that 300,000 emails in your list are at risk for your sender reputation. And it seems that we found about 10,000 confirmed spam traps and 220,000 invalid emails. So it's as simple as just clicking through these tabs to understand, all right, how many valid do I have in my email list? Okay, that's great. And I think the real power of this report is understanding the metrics behind warnings and errors as well. Because this is where, from FreshAddress, using our experience and understanding what all of these are, is we'll break this down for you. So we'll tell you what is invalid. So we talked a little bit about that. What's a bad domain, what's problematic, and then subcategory of that, how many spam traps there are. And then we'll just go through and list the role accounts, anything bogus, frequent complainers. We talked about disposable, anything that has derogatory words in it for an email address. These are all broken out and you're aware of it. On a similar vein, if we go to errors, you'll get a full breakdown as well. And I think it's important to note for both of these categories, even if there are no hits in the particular category like this, so ends with a period, missing domain, we're still going to tell you what we're measuring against. So when you run your list right now, you'll get a full report and you'll know exactly what we're measuring against and where you're doing well. So this list did great with this category, but where you need to improve right here. And then finally, duplicates. Most lists are going to have some duplicates. In this particular one, it's 0.5% of the list. It could be more, it could be less. We're going to let you know if there's an email address that is a duplicate of some other one in the file itself. So on a similar vein, I want to show you quickly what the white label looks like. So, right here, we're still on the normal report. We have the free list check by FreshAddress. We have someone you can contact up here. And then we have the next step. If you actually want to do a paid service, we have our safe to send, which would do something similar to this, but more importantly, give you the results and then corrections and do, pretty much all the steps to make sure you actually have a clean list and then letting you know what you can and cannot do next. But if you want to do a white label because you want to show a potential client of yours, you can just run a white label report. Now, this isn't the same list, but for the sake and purposes of showing you this is what the report looks like. There's no mentions of anything else. It's really just the report, clicking through valids, warnings, errors. In this particular file, there were no duplicates, so we didn't want to kind of bog you down with this, but this one had no errors, but it's just showing you what it measured against. And then it lists out the warnings and valids just as the other one did. So this is a really powerful tool, and it's really just letting you know how your list is doing, what your list health is like. It won't tell you the specific amount, or it won't tell you the specific email, but it tells you the amount. So if you want to check your list, you can easily go to Free List Check right now, upload something up to 5 million, and then run it. And it's important to note that the 5 million cap that we have, that's just to prevent someone from abusing it or spamming it. If you did want to run a larger list, something larger than 5 million, you're absolutely free to, and you just have to contact us to let us know and we can adjust it. But any one of you can run a 5 million list a day. So it's just a per day cap. So I think, one of our most important solutions, something we really focused on, was making sure that this report was robust and it gave you as accurate as accounting as it could for what your list health is like, so that you can make a decision: do I need to clean this, or am I good to go? Now, it's still important to note, we talked about how one spam trap alone could ruin a campaign. So you still want to keep in mind that, even if you just have one spam trap, or you're pretty high on invalids or problematics, that's maybe something you want to address. But with this free tool, you can check that out now and then potentially do something about it. And with that, I'm actually going to turn it back over to Keith.
Thanks, Chuck. All right, so if you do choose to use free list check and you find out that your list looks pretty bad, hire an expert. We're always here to help. And if you want to learn more about our Safe to Send email hygiene service, you can reach us at any time. My information, Chuck's email information are provided in the presentation. Go to FreshAddress.com. There's a million different ways to reach out to us, and we're happy to speak to you whenever you like. And this is going to conclude the presentation portion of our call today. And we'd like to open it up for some questions if you have some. If you think of some later on, again, reach out to us at your convenience. We'll open it up for questions for right now. Chuck, I do see one question about the real-time solution. Do you want to speak to that?
For the real-time solution, are we talking about the free list check?
No, I think they're actually talking about the Safe to Send real time. I see a question. I don't know if you can see in the side there.
Yeah, it's not popping up for me, but I can address it a little bit. And if I miss something, Keith, feel free to add on to it. But for point of sale systems, for different websites, we have an API integration. So something Keith was speaking to earlier, if you work with FreshAddress and using our API, if someone's typing in an email address and they fat finger it, it's real-time validation. It's something that will let them know this is either an invalid or it's got a typo. And so we can show them what they typed in and then also give them the suggested email address they meant. So that real-time validation is something that we support across a variety of different areas, whether it could be someone manually entering it in a call center, a website form, or a point-of-sale system.
Yeah, and there's another element of this question just asking kind of what automation platforms work best with the solution. Any opinions there?
For something like that, let's see. Keith, do we have the person who asked that? Because I can get back to them with that. I'm not quite sure right now offhand.
Okay, yeah, we'll do that. I'll forward you over the question and you can follow up via email.
Perfect.
If anybody has additional questions, we'll leave it open for a moment, and then I think we're going to wrap it up here. All right, it looks like that's it. We really appreciate you guys for joining us today. And again, we'll follow up with a thank you email that will contain a copy of the presentation and a recording. Again, any questions, give us a shout at any time. Thanks again for joining us and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.